We'll call the meeting back to order with agenda item number 10, Nevada Department of Wildlife Project Updates, Director Wasley, informational. The commission has requested that the department provide regular project updates for ongoing projects and programs as appropriate based on geography and timing of meetings. These updates are intended to provide detail in addition to the summaries provided as part of the regular department report and are intended to inform the commission and public as to the department's ongoing duties and responsibilities. Director Wasley.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. As the description for the agenda item states, as we move the commission meeting locations around the state, we like to take advantage of the geography and bring up relevant issues for the commission. We have two project updates today for the commission. The first one is kind of a follow-up on the most recent meeting that we had down here. We took a field trip out to the desert. We looked at some buckets in the desert and talked about commercial collection of reptiles and wanted to kind of provide a little bit more information about that practice. And we have our Southern Nevada reptile biologist, Jason Jones, here to give us a presentation on that. And then the second item that we have for you today is kind of a program update and report on our aquatic invasive species program. And because of the presence of quagga mussels in Lake Mead and the number of stations that we have down here, this is really kind of the epicenter of a lot of our AIS efforts. And the next agenda item is the draft AIS species management plan. And so we thought having that project update prior to presenting the commission with that draft AIS management plan would also provide some context for you to review that plan. So first off, we'll have a PowerPoint presentation from the Southern Nevada reptile biologist Jason Jones, kind of a follow-up, as I said, to our previous field trip. Jason?
Can I pick a mic?
Pick a mic.
Awesome. Thanks to the director's office and the commission once again for entertaining me. Hopefully I have a pointer. Perfect. So this is an update on commercial collection, which we talked on a little bit last time, and the pitfall traps, which you toured. So just up front, everyone collects, right? Whether it's memories, photos, coins, baseball cards, reptiles, trophies, in terms of game trophies as well. I would argue that some collections are very legal and you don't need a permit. Some you need a permit, and some are just straight up illegal. I think to talk about reptile collection, we should go back to the 16th and 17th century. So just to give you a little background, it's rooted pretty much in Germany, where they had these things called Wunderkammern, cabinets of curiosities, where they had a bunch of mostly dead specimens, and it was a status symbol. Essentially, the wealthy would have all these curios in their cabinets to show off. A modern day cabinet of curiosity could look something like this, which is essentially a lot of terrariums that are filled with different reptiles and amphibians. And I would argue that probably many of us in this room have one in our own house, just an aquarium. Interestingly, to go back to now to go from kind of global to maybe a little more national level, 4.7 million households own 13.6 million pet reptiles. That's essentially 1 per 20 houses own approximately 3 reptiles. And just to give you a little comparison to hunting and fishing numbers, that's compared to 1 in 2.5 million households are hunters or anglers. So a lot of people actually own reptiles. This brings in $1.4 billion annually to the U.S. economy. That means 11.3 million live reptiles are exported from the U.S. every single year. 900,000 are imported. It used to not be that way. It used to actually be the opposite. So I would argue that it's pretty obvious that U.S. businesses dominate the global reptile industry. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention that next to drug smuggling, or specifically narcotics, wildlife smuggling is actually one of the biggest trafficked things on the planet. And live reptiles actually constitute most of the live animals that are trafficked illegally. So the reason being is that rare reptiles are more profitable than heroin, or so said a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agent. As I've talked to you before about Gila monsters, they can get upwards of $2,000 just for one single Gila monster. That's a pretty expensive reptile. And the reason they're so easily trafficked is not just because of money, but actually the ease in which you can traffic reptiles. So here you can see suitcases full of reptiles in little deli cups. You'll also see water bottles with snakes in them. These are all confiscated. Even a book in the far right-hand corner. That's because physiologically reptiles are cold-blooded or ectothermic. And that makes it really easy for them to be packaged into bottles and shipped for almost weeks on end. So they can essentially take a beating, and it takes a little longer for them to die. But they're suffering nevertheless. Also, I would argue that it's lack of international, federal, and state enforcement. And this is an issue across the globe. So the question is then, how do you go from collection to these cabinets of curiosity? So I'm just going to walk you through two different ways that we've already discussed. One is obviously in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that's the smuggling, right? That's illegal. The top right-hand corner would be legal, so you can actually ship them across the U.S., across the country, or across the world. I do put in there, but there are illegal take methods, such as pitfall traps. So you may be trafficking critters with permits, but you may have illegal take methods, or you may have species origins falsified. So you collected it from one area, you trafficked it to another, and then shipped it from that area. Often species can be mislabeled. It's sometimes really hard to discern between two different individual species. So say, for instance, you have a Gila monster and you call it a chuckwalla. If no one actually opens that box and looks at it, they may never know. Or if someone doesn't know what a chuckwalla or a Gila monster looks like, they wouldn't know. And also, captive bred is commonly misused, meaning you could say you bred it in captivity, which is legal in many places, but instead you wild caught it. So that's kind of the means from getting to the field into kind of this cabinet of curiosity, or your house. So again, just to reiterate that point, the U.S. is predominantly the exporter of most reptiles in the world. And that's depicted here in black. And in white is the least exported countries. So these little asterisks right here denote two species, a leopard gecko and the bearded dragon, which if you go to any pet shop, probably in town, or in any town you live in, honestly, you'll probably see these two reptile species in the pet shop. These are captively bred commonly. And that's because if you notice the two countries of origin near Afghanistan and Turkey, all the way into India and also Australia, they heavily regulate export. So these are required to be captive born. Oops. So the 15 most popular reptiles that are actually exported from the U.S. Are predominantly turtles. And you'll see here, if you add up the numbers on the right-hand side, the percentages, 97% of all reptile exports from the U.S. are turtles. Nevada does not allow any export of turtles, so we can clear that off the list. The four species that are highlighted in yellow, those, some of them are introduced or non-native in the places where they're actually collected. And then one of them is actually the leopard gecko, which I just showed you. And you'll notice at the bottom, I clipped out a little bit from an article that notes in the last 20 years, almost 90% of our exports are captive bred. So there's been this big push for captive breeding for a variety of reasons. So I played this little game where I took the numbers from that 11.3 million annually exported, and I took off 97% for turtles, and then I reduced the remaining four species that I just highlighted, and I played a little game because we've heard from commercial collectors that they predominantly export to European market. So playing this game, you'll see that from 2005 to 2010, you have 771,000 reptiles exported. Now, the columns to the right, you have Nevada reptiles collected, and that's from actual self-reported collection from our commercial collectors. And to the right, it's presumed that all of those go out to the European market. And you'll see that it can range anywhere from 6% to 51% on any given year. So we're actually supplying a global market with up to 51% of that trade. On average, that's 12% across those 5 years. So that's something just to put in the back of your head. The reason being, like I said, it's not only are they easy to traffic or export, ship, etc., but they also get a lot of money. So the top right-hand corner, you'll see $250 for a chuckwalla. This is actually in the US. So typically in a European market, on average, from the research I've done, it's almost 3 times that. You'll see on the left from Backwater Reptiles, it goes everywhere from $40 on sale for a desert horn lizard to a side blotch lizard, which is arguably the most common lizard on our landscape, at $12.99, and that's again in the US. A speckled rattlesnake sells for $200 in the bottom left-hand corner, and bottom right-hand corner is a desert spiny lizard for almost 20 bucks. So that just gives you an indication that some of the common stuff can even go for $13, whereas some of the more long-lived and maybe rare species like chuckwalla go for $250. So this kind of feeds into this next slide, which this is a year in the life of one collector, and this is 2015, so just 2 years ago. And as you note, I list the species on that kind of right-hand column and the numbers on the left. And the question was, how much does it generate the pet trade as a whole? Not how much do these people make, but rather how much does it generate for the pet trade as a whole? So here are the numbers that I could get from websites and just perusing. It's really hard to peruse European websites from the States, plus I had to use a little translator. But nevertheless, you'll see that for chuckwalla, it was as low as $109 versus a gopher snake, which was $380, which I doubt is that much in Europe. But I think it all comes out in the wash because we just saw that a chuckwalla can go for $250, not $109. So just playing along, you'll see that on the very bottom, the pet trade revenue that's generated if you go to a strictly European market could be $670,000. So that's 1 year alone for one collector from the state of Nevada versus $200,000 just for the US market. So regardless, we're almost to $250,000 from one collector alone. So that's a lot of money. So a coworker said, well, I wonder what biomass, what weight that would equate to for desert bighorn. I thought this would be fun because you guys probably talk about bighorn more than reptiles. So that equates to 7.6 male bighorn sheep. Now that's a 200-pound sheep. So just to kind of give you an indication, that's how many one collector can take. Approximately 7.5 male bighorn sheep in weight of reptiles. So why is it that they come to Nevada and collect? So as I've argued before, we have really cool species. They're novel, they're unique. There's high endemism, which means that these species only occur in the Great Basin, Mojave, and or Sonoran deserts. So they don't occur throughout the US. We have a relatively high species diversity. In the state of Nevada, we have 53 species of reptile. That's pretty cool. So not only are they novel and unique, but they're also very diverse. And finally, we are the only Western state that allows commercial collection. You'll see Idaho is in orange, and I discussed this last time. It's one collector for a rattlesnake species on private land. So that's more of a service than a commercial collection. So here's a little depiction, a little GIF depiction. It started in 1987, I believe, and you'll see it's moving through on the top, 92, 93. Anyhow, just to get to the point, unique, we have unique novel species. You can't get them anywhere else. High diversity, we have unlimited take on most of our species. And you'll see that through time, it expands across the state and it contracts, but there are definitely hot spots. So just kind of give you an idea of where they're collecting. I do want to note that 1,000+ points were omitted from this because they fell outside of our boundary, which is kind of interesting. So getting back to this, if you summed up across the years, these 5 years, the pet trade could essentially be making $10 million off of Nevada reptiles, just for that example I used alone. Now that's just this little teeny box in this plot. I want you to note that in the bottom left-hand corner on the x-axis going left to right, it goes from 86 to 2016, so 30-year time span. And then from the bottom to the top on the y-axis, it goes all the way to 35,000. So over the course of time, we have had over 400,000 reptiles self-reported to be harvested from the state. Annually, that's 14,000 reptiles. You can see there's a peak of 31, almost 32,000 reptiles that were self-reported. I do want to bring up a couple things. Early on, there were certain species that were selected for collection, so that's why there were lower numbers. In 90, there was also a commission review of the regulations, some court battles that ensued, and ultimately it was lifted. And you'll see that there was a precipitous incline to collection all the way to 32,000, and then you'll see it kind of drops. The trend is decreasing. There is a dip, which was about the time when we had a commission review in 1999. And without a doubt, why the decline? Well, if you put up numbers, and here on the right-hand side, you'll see the number goes from 35 on the y-axis to 0, which is number of collectors. You'll see that we've ranged from 2 collectors all the way to 31. So undoubtedly, more collectors equals more harvest, right? However, I think there's something a little deeper to this story. So these are top 5 collectors. Now we went from 2002 on that x-axis. For each one of those, it's 2002 to 2016. Now, the reason we did that is because previous to that, they would sum up everything by month, and also it was township range. So we decided just because of the higher accuracy, we would go from 2002 to 2016. And you'll see that it ranges dramatically. It's not 1,000 reptiles per collector, but rather some collectors on average collect 8,000 reptiles a year, whereas some 288. The bottom number I just put up is this number of days on average they spend out collecting. So it's pretty remarkable that someone can collect 140 reptiles on average a day. And this little red box indicates that these people all actually are related. So our top 4 of our 5 collectors actually all know each other very well. And some of them actually target certain species, not only areas, but species. And I kind of want to give you a couple little case examples. So this is a chuckwalla. Over the course of the last 30 years, nearly 16,000 chuckwallas have been collected. 92 have been self-reported to leave in one day. This particular species is herbivorous, so it only eats vegetation. It's saxicalis, there you go, meaning it lives in rocks, rocky outcroppings. So it's very habitat dependent. It's a specialist. It also has a really low annual recruitment rate of 20%. Lifespan of a chuckwalla can be 15 years. Generation time is roughly 8 years. And to sexual maturity, it's about 3 years. Oops. This bottom right-hand graph is really interesting. I'm going to walk you through it. So the bottom, again, goes from 2002 to 2016. That red line that goes across is like 0. So what it essentially is telling us is if you were to collect the same number every single year, you would hit that red line on the money. Anytime you collect more than the previous year, it goes above that red line. Anything less than the previous year, it goes below that red line. So if you add it up, you'll see that in general, the trend is that you have more negative years than positive years, almost double the negative years. So that would indicate that there's a negative trend in the population, meaning that there's probably impacts associated with collection. And that makes sense, right? Because these guys are long-lived. They have an 8-year generation time. So if you were to harvest adults, you wouldn't see them coming back the next year. It would take upwards of 3 years even to have a mature animal from that previous cohort. Maybe even more interestingly, the timing at which collection occurs happens to overlap with breeding potential. So this inset graph on the right is essentially breeding potential. It says testy volume, so we're looking at male breeding potential. And so on the x-axis, it goes from February to October, and you'll see there's a spike between May and June, which interestingly, the spike hits about May, drops off in June, but nevertheless, the highest collection happens roughly when chuckwallas are sexually active. So you're taking out potential breeders. A study that was funded by Clark County and was done by Utah State University in the early 2000s found what they did is they actually went out to sites throughout Clark County and they literally removed chuckwallas. They took them from the landscape and they did not return them. And they wanted to see what collection would do. So this was actually a controlled scientific study. And they found that these removal surveys not only impacted chuckwalla populations, but they were slow to recover. And again, it's because they have small clutch sizes, they're long-lived, takes a while for them to mature, and there's little to no migration. They live in these rocky outcroppings, so they don't have any places to go, and they're habitat specialists, they're herbivores, so they're very much stuck to the landscape. So these populations could contribute to a population crash. Now, taking a different species, the horned lizard, which hopefully all of you have seen, this species is interesting because this is the most widely collected reptile that we have in the state. 105,000 have left the state. Over 600 have been harvested in one day. This is an ant specialist, so things like red brome, cheatgrass are actually impacting these guys greatly, actually all horned lizards. And being an ant specialist, they eat harvester ants. So you probably see a lot of other ants, fire ants, etc., invading maybe even your house. Those ants actually impact these guys because they can't eat them the same as a harvester ant. So they're a specialist again. They have delayed reproduction, meaning not every single year do they reproduce. 8-year lifespan, 4-year generation time, 2 years to maturity. Again, if you look on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that the negative outweighs the positive. So again, it seems there's a trend towards a population decrease. And this is across the state. So we did this for the top 8 reptile species, and I'm not going to show you all those graphs because that could get really tedious. 5 of those were species of conservation priority. And what we found is on average, you had 5 good years and you had 8 bad years. So that seems like a negative trend. Now, focusing more on valleys and areas where we've seen some of the most collection. The top graph on both of these is days. So it's just the number of days that the collectors in general, all of them, are going out and collecting. The middle graphs are reptiles per day. So that's kind of an average, like an effort. And then the bottom is the total take. So that's just some numbers. What I find interesting is that if you go to 2006, you'll see that they had 3 years in the top graph. They had 3 years where they put in the most effort. However, it seems that reptiles per day dramatically declined that 3rd year. And then over the course of time, you see that trend going down on both graphs, but even with an increased effort, they had very little return, which would also indicate populations aren't doing so well. And this is just reptiles in general. This isn't horned lizard or desert iguana or chuckwalla. This is reptiles in general in this valley. Similarly, in the Ivanpah Pahrump valleys, you see a similar trend with a high peak following a precipitous decline. And then years later, you put in a little more effort and you still don't get the bang for the buck. So this is another time lapse, and this is in Amargosa Valley. And you'll see that even though you're going to new places, you're not getting the return you would expect. That makes sense. So there's some areas that are hit routinely year after year, but new areas are hit every single year. But you're still not getting the number of animals you first got. And so to kind of back off at the state level, I find this interesting. So that on the top left is 1994. That's when 32,000 reptiles were harvested from the state. The next little dotted line where it says 21,000, that's 2001, and then so on. So you can see it goes from the most collection, which interestingly is like the least spatial area, they go to way more places in 2001 and 2009, yet they're not collecting as many reptiles. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not entirely sure how to explain that. So now backing off, this is now on pitfall traps. So you guys most of you toured the Amargosa Valley, and we looked at pitfall traps. And so this is just kind of an update. We decided to go through and check a lot of those traps with the help of BLM and some volunteers. And to date, we have checked 368 traps in just this valley, and 307 were open. Now I put that little inset photo to show you what a trap that's not open looks like, and you can see right there that like a lizard can hop out, probably a scorpion could hop out, pretty easy to get in and out. So it's mostly filled. And whereas this shovel-nosed snake it's actually hanging out right in an open trap. And I forgot to have Chris pass around some of these. So these are some of the animals that we actually collected from a pitfall trap just this week, with the exception of the leopard lizard, which was donated to us today for show and tell. So of those 307 traps checked, here are the numbers. So 197 reptiles were observed. So essentially 64% of the traps contain reptiles. 97% of those traps, 31% of those traps contain mammals. So 96 mammals were observed. 99 scorpions were observed, and I put a little asterisk next to 69% because it wasn't until halfway through this that we heard that they actually do collect scorpions, which we don't regulate, but I thought that was of interest. So we started quantifying the number of scorpions that we also saw, because that's also a commercial profit. And this is a little grim, but here's what we found. So essentially half of the reptiles in those traps are dead. Dead is black, red is alive. And you'll see that mammals fare even worse, with 96% of them dead in trap. Whereas scorpions, it's about 3/4 of them are dead. I would argue that we greatly underestimate the percentage of dead, and that's for two reasons that I can think of. One, because there's obvious predation. Even Jack Robb noted that he saw an antelope ground squirrel jump out of a trap with something in its mouth, or it was eating something. I've seen an antelope ground squirrel jump out with a whiptail lizard in its mouth and ran off. We also know that snakes commonly will frequent pitfall traps, like a gopher snake that's this long can get out of a 5-gallon bucket. So it'll essentially, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? It can feed and then leave. So we're probably not seeing what's really there and what's really being taken. And also, in one trap alone, we found 140 beetles. So beetles, we know, are decomposing these things really rapidly. Arguably for reptiles, they're decomposed even faster. They don't have the fur that mammals do, so there's really no sign of a reptile. So that's why I'd argue we're greatly underestimating the percentage of dead. And then I put quotation marks around live because ethically, at least if you were to apply for a permit to pitfall trap, you'd be required to check your pitfall trap upwards of 3 times a day, depending on the temperatures. Definitely daily. And that's because if you see here the top left photo of the side blotch lizard, they get really emaciated and they'll die fast. So that's a side blotch lizard from a pitfall trap, and the right-hand side is a side blotch lizard that's healthy. And this is just kind of a faces of death photo, I guess. This is just kind of showing you some of the things we have seen. That middle one are 2 desert iguanas. There's a desert iguana in the bottom right-hand corner that has its tail gnawed off, probably by an antelope ground squirrel or maybe by a scorpion. We've seen scorpions eat reptiles. So undoubtedly, if you have 4 scorpions in a pitfall trap, they're probably eating the small lizards that fall in. And then now to, so as part of the tour, we hit one particular section of road that you guys might remember. And since then, we actually decided to repeat and go back to those traps. Now, there were 40 traps along a half-mile stretch of road. 30 of those were active. So from May to June this year, we went and removed all live and dead animals and started quantifying how much they were trapping per week. So if theoretically you were going every week and looking at your traps, what would you catch? So again, on the left-hand corner, we have 0 meaning dead. Everything's dead. 1 is everything's alive. So that's the percentage of live animals on the left-hand corner. On the bottom is just across from May 25th to June 20th. So for reptiles, as previously noted, it was expected we'd get 50% of them dead, right? So right off the bat, when we first did this, 50% were dead. And then the next week, 100% were alive. Now again, many of them were emaciated, but they were still quote-unquote alive. And you'll see that kind of dips, but it's relatively high. So it's a pretty good catch regardless. So if you checked them every week, you'd still probably harvest some stuff. Now, again, this doesn't fare well for, scorpions. It's a little, try that again. It's a little different. And in those parentheses, that's the actual number of live to total. For scorpions, it's a similar trend, but it's a little less, right? Now for mammals, it's just flatline. They're all dead. They were all dead. So If you were to only be harvesting scorpions, let's say, it would not be as profitable. It'd be a third as less profitable as harvesting reptiles. So just kind of an interesting side note. Yeah. I would say that's a good question, but I unfortunately am the reptile expert. No, yeah, and so that's one thing. There you go. There you go. You can do that. We don't regulate that. So you can kind of imagine then the impact of 700 plus traps, which actually commercial collectors volunteered that information, that they have 700 traps out on the landscape. So you can imagine the impact of 700 traps open 365 days of the year for maybe 20 years. So at this rate, we know that they're not checked weekly. We know that they're checked maybe even every couple months. So just kind of something to think about. So then going back to that question, why the decline? Again, I don't think it's just as easy as just number of collectors. I think there's a lot of other things going on. And you know, one thing I would argue is that I think one of the reasons for decline is I don't think it's as profitable anymore, given that you have so many captive breeding operations going. 25 years ago, I worked at a pet shop, and it was novel to get a captive bred reptile in. Now you go to a pet shop, and it's almost a standard to have a captive bred reptile that they're selling you. And that's not only for parasites, but also kind of for ethics. And then you know it's legal. So there's a lot of other things that have gone on in those 20 years. So that's one reason. In addition to, I think populations are getting impacted. And then also, just to kind of sum this up, you know, reptiles, you know, maybe, I think in my field, we kind of take this for granted that reptiles play an important role, but they play an important role not only in our economy because they are eating a lot of pests and things like that, but also culturally, you know, everything from crazy dragons to serpents. I mean, they're fantastic. They're things that people talk about, and there's folklore surrounding them. But also, they undoubtedly play a really important role in the ecosystems in which we manage. And they're niche specialists, and I would argue they probably are the best indicator for not only habitat quality, but potentially climate change, given that they're ectothermic. And this is a lot, but this is just to kind of sum up what I just presented to you. Collection obviously targets and appears to deplete populations and population sources of long-lived and reproductively limited species, particularly like chuckwalla. We even saw that for the horned lizard, which requires increased species diversity, meaning you have to collect more species and start diversifying, and also increase your collection areas. And I don't know if that falls outside the boundary, but we have had points fall outside the boundary. And that's just to match market demands. Now, collection is additive. It's not something that you know, will fix all our problems if it's gone. It's an additive thing to habitat loss, to drought, disease. It's kind of death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. Now, the data is limited also. I want to note that when we do get this commercial collection data in, I've struggled to analyze this for several years now and have talked to a lot of colleagues who publish a lot on species level, population level interactions and population trends. And it's really tough to wrangle this. And that's because it's not driven by science or management, it's driven by a market. So when they're going out, they're not actually doing anything that's repeatable in space or time. They're going out based on a market demand. And also, given the increasing trend in captive breeding, it seems there's a decreasing need for commercial collection. And sadly, things like horned lizards do really poorly in captivity. So despite them being the most collected species, they also probably are the worst to keep in captivity, at least from the ones that the species that we manage. And then last but not least, this is something that probably should be discussed, and that's that we know of 3 different diseases that have been involved in the herp trade that have been decimating populations of amphibians and also snake. Interestingly, snake fungus from the US has infiltrated the European market through export, presumably, and is starting to decimate collections of reptiles in Europe. So it's kind of a twist because previously we had 2 good examples of amphibian diseases that have been introduced into the U.S. and have been decimating populations. So regardless, the pet trade definitely does have has its hand in implications regarding disease. And so to end, I would say, Nevada is great, and I pitched this last time. Not only do we have high endemism, really novel, unique species, we have high species diversity. It's a really great state. And I guess one cautionary note, I hope commercial collection doesn't undermine that greatness. With that, I'll end. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Jason.
Yeah.
That was great. Questions? Commissioner Hubbs?
Thank you. That was very insightful. I was just, I'm concerned just mainly because of, well, there's several things that were concerning when I see a presentation of this nature. The first and foremost concern to me was the apparent look of waste of just our wildlife in general, which is disheartening. But secondly, that we don't really know who's doing this, and we're not really looking at who's doing this. And thirdly, and I think what should be of most import to individuals who are worried about being able to use our open lands is that we very much did down in the south have an issue, obviously, with a reptile. We have one that's listed on the endangered species list. And once that happens, it creates havoc across the habitat, especially if it's critical habitat for that species. So I don't think it's ever a good thing to turn a blind eye to waste of any species, especially ones that are sensitive in nature, and it can impact them fairly quickly.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Commissioner Drew? Jason, thanks for the presentation. I think last time we were in the field, we had talked about removing some of these pitfall traps. And I don't know if there's some issues associated with that, but maybe if you can give us an update on any of that has been moved forward with, or if there's still some things that are pending. And understanding you may not be able to fully answer that question, but I'm just kind of curious if any progress has been made.
We have been working, obviously, it's an issue also with the agency that manages the land, right? Because pitfall traps, we would be permitting if people were actually pitfall trapping for vertebrates. But that would also require you get permission from the land owning or land managing agency. And so we've been working in cooperation with the BLM to discuss this and figure out a means to eliminating pitfall traps because they obviously have a dog in this fight. But one thing we want to do is actually quantify how many are out on the landscape, and that's a pretty difficult task because, as you noted, probably all of you noted, driving out there, just as a casual observer, it's not really apparent. So we have been starting to remove some. In fact, in the Ivanpah Valley, we removed 85 just this last 2 months ago. Had volunteers come out and we removed 85 traps. That's in addition to over 200 that allegedly were removed by consulting companies when they were installing those solar fields. And then we've removed some in the Amargosa Valley, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, yeah, I agree. It's real eye-opening. So one of the things that catches my attention is the concept of additive. So are you seeing that the mortality or it's additive to, not necessarily the mortality, but across all species, or is it specific to just certain species, or?
That's an excellent question. The tough thing is, with 53 species of reptile, some of them we don't know anything about their life history. The best we know about certain species is through museum specimens and understanding like reproductive ecology or just things like that. It's just observational data is the best we do. So I can't really address that question. I mean, for Chuckwa, it's a little heavy. It's a little, I guess, a heavier hitter, so to speak. It's a species of concern for like BLM and for multiple states, and so that's what it's kind of instigated by Clark County is their interest in Chuckwalas. So as we go along, all of these species have such different life history traits Some of them, like the shovel-nosed snake you saw, they're strictly nocturnal, whereas other species that'll be diurnal, come out only during the day, might be impacted differently. But I mean, across the board, when you saw the graph of overall reptiles in some of those valleys, that was all reptiles that were of commercial value declining. So it's a tough egg to crack.
And I appreciate that, and I guess in my mind, the fact that you don't know if it's additive because it says a lot, because we don't know a lot about them. So from a conservation standpoint, it seems like that in and of itself would raise significant concern, so I think it's no secret where I stand on the issue. I don't know. I certainly think that it's warranted a pretty in-depth conversation about how we handle commercialization, how we handle the commercial collection of wildlife in Nevada. And I understand that there's two stories to every side, but right now my concerns are certainly there. And I noticed the other thing that kind of rang with me was the effort. And I know you can dig out situations where it doesn't hold true, but the number of folks, the effort that's put in, theoretically, with the number of animals collected, the fact that there's more effort going in and not as many animals, as many reptiles, kind of resonated with me a little bit too. And I think that that's starting to tell us a story that sooner that we deal with this or evaluate it or take a good hard look at it, the better. So I appreciate your being on top of it.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, typically, at least from my experience, and this is working with reptiles for 20 plus years, you really realize how additive it really is when it's too late. And that's when a listing petition comes and you get another desert tortoise, and then you invest a lot of effort into understanding a species. So it's one of those things where certain threats, you don't know how real they are until someone comes knocking on your door. Thanks.
Commissioner Hubbs.
I have some questions about the type of regulations that were put in place way back in the 80s. And then I know a little bit about that, but what was the methodology? What was so controversial about monitoring commercial collection, and why didn't we stick with that? And was that the best approach back in that time? And would it be something to look at or revisit to kind of see what they had put in place at that time?
Is that a question for me?
I was looking at any one of the commissioners, but they all are looking back at me, so it makes me think that it's for you.
So I'm Jennifer Newmark. I'm the administrator of the Wildlife Diversity Division. So I wasn't around at the time, but from what I can understand in my readings, there was a general regulation that was put in place in the late 80s to prohibit commercial collection. I think it was 1989. And then there was a court battle over whether the department had the authority to be able to, and the commission as well, the commission and the department could go forward with such a prohibition. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in the commission and the department's favor. However, it was a temporary regulation that was put in place, and it was let to expire. So that's kind of the history there. Some of the interesting parts about that that I kind of would think are important to note. One point that was brought up with the commercial collection was that because there is such a lack of data on reptiles, that this was an opportunity for the department to get more data. And so much like what Jason said, I want to emphasize that's not the right kind of data that the department can use to manage the species. So this is data that's removal data, animals going out from the wild rather than staying in the wild. So it doesn't help us really managing that. And then I don't know, maybe Director Wasley or Deputy Director has some feedback on what kind of the thought process was there, but I do know, I remember hearing how controversial it was, and there was lots of input from the public. that kind of help?
Yeah, it seems like perhaps just a complete prohibition may have been too much. I'm wondering if there's better methodology for regulation of commercial collecting versus just a blanket approach.
I think it's something to that it's worth considering whether the right approach is a complete prohibition or whether it's a different approach of maybe setting seasons, making sure that we're not removing animals during a reproductive season. Certainly, in my personal opinion, there's certain areas of the state that have been collected at very heavily for the past 20 years, and so it might be worth considering closing certain areas. But if it were me, and I'll be so bold to say this, I would look at it across the board, and I think at a minimum, prohibiting it at least for a few years to move forward and better understand the impacts. I think that's something worth considering.
Further questions from the commission? Commissioner Allenberg?
Yeah, Jason, what are some of the other states that have stricter regulations? What kind of regulations do they have in place?
So I can speak about Utah. So California, it's almost across the board, no commercial collection. They do allow biological supply companies to collect extremely common species, and that is not for the commercial gain like we're discussing. It's more for, sending out to universities to do, labs on certain species of amphibian, whatnot. Utah has a permit-only system, so technically you could apply for a permit. Having worked there for 4 years in their headquarters, no one would ever get a permit there. I mean, it would be pretty tough because you'd have to justify, and it would be, again, probably some very limited take numbers, et cetera. But it's a pretty strict permitting process. I don't think they've ever issued a commercial collection permit. In Arizona, it's just an outright ban. They do have, like California and Arizona, what they do is they put amphibians and reptiles onto hunting licenses, and then they've been able to kind of increase some of the take for some of those species. So it's mostly for public use. So, if you wanted to catch things for a pet personally, you could do that. So I think that's how they've kind of circumnavigated that. Yeah. And talking to Idaho, I did talk to their Charlie Justice in Idaho, who's a game warden. I think he might be upwards of chief warden. He had noted that once this one collector ceases to collect, they will not allow commercial collection in the state of Idaho. So, yeah.
Further questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate your comments, Jen. It's hard to come out, but I would agree with you on that. I certainly think that's my default point, and if there's something that's real compelling that would back me off of that, I'll be open to it. But after seeing that plot of Amargosa Valley, man, that's ecosystem wide there. I mean, that's a massive area, and that thing's been hit really hard for a long time. And I do believe that the numbers are very light, just based on your thought process, the thoughts that you expressed during the presentation. It just seems to me like that number could be so much bigger than that, so significant. And I'm not sure that we have time to go check to see how bad it is. I think there's a lot of indications that it's been significant, and I'm definitely willing to go down that path just for what it's worth. So I don't know what our next step is from this point, but.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question that I think probably others up here are wondering. Is the department looking for the commission to do something, or is there something that we can do?
I think that the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court ruling, one of the key points of discussion was where that burden of proof lies, and does that burden of proof lie with the state to demonstrate that this activity isn't having an impact, or does it lie with those who wish to perform or conduct this activity? And it's my understanding that the state Supreme Court said that burden of proof should be on those who wish to conduct this activity. And so, whether it's the commission's desire to see some kind of draft regulation for, complete prohibition or at least a cessation to determine those impacts and put that burden of proof where the court has decided it belongs, and determine, if seasons are appropriate. I mean, as it stands right now, a hobby collector is limited to 5. Commercial collectors are unlimited. So there are some interesting, hypocrisies in the regulations that exist now. I think that the state Supreme Court ruling that burden of proof lies with those who wish to conduct this activity makes sense to me. Whether it's a temporary cessation or a complete prohibition, let's see some demonstration that these impacts aren't real or aren't prolonged. And so, I mean, the department will go whichever direction the commission thinks best, but, and this today is just an informational, it's a project update, it's an informational item. It would clearly need to come before this commission in a different format in the future. But, I think what we are seeing warrants some further examination and discussion as to what's appropriate and who should shoulder that burden.
Vice Chairman Johnston.
Just but we have an issue right now of illegal commercial collection with the pitfall traps. I mean, that's not legal, is my understanding when we did the field trip out there. But I guess I have another question. What are we gonna do to try to remove all these traps? Because when I went out and looked at them, eventually they'll probably fill in with sand and dirt over time. But until that occurs, they're all out there, and you're still having the effect on that wildlife in that sense. And I don't know if you can do it, but if any criminal prosecutions occur, if people are caught with these illegal traps, I mean, we've got to push that they need to go out there and remove their offending traps, not put it on the department or volunteers. And thank goodness we have those volunteers who are willing to go out there and do all this work. But I mean, you have a lingering problem even if they can't take the animals out of the traps and export them just because of the number of traps that are out there. And I mean, we have to figure out what we do about that. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to it.
Commissioner Hubbs.
That's a great question. I was thinking you have been working with the BLM. You said predominantly that's the land that you're seeing the most intense trapping on. And are they prepared and willing and open to start to work with NDOW to help clean that up?
Yeah, they definitely are. They obviously see it as an ecosystem level impact, and they're more than willing to help. So, at least the southern region. I mean, the other problem is that we kind of luckily stumbled into these, and so to understand the magnitude of this would take probably a lot more effort. Because they're not that easy to find, and we suspect in other valleys there may be more pitfall traps, but it's a lot of driving around or potentially flying or something, but somehow surveying and actually quantifying how many are out there so we can better understand it. And it may be beyond southern Nevada. That's a good question, but definitely southern Nevada BLM is interested.
Anything further from the commission? Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you. Just one more comment. I mean, if there's a nexus, which, is a whole other conversation between these pitfalls and the folks that are actually providing the data and collecting these animals, I'm going to be even more, I'll be even more sure that we're doing the right thing by stopping this nonsense. Because if this is how there is in fact commercial collection going on by folks that we know, we believe are part of that process, and they're using these pitfalls, that nonsense needs to stop. And I'm all in on doing away with it, because if that's how things are gonna go, that's just ridiculous. And I agree with you, Commissioner Johnson, if there was some way to compel them to go out there and clean up the mess, that would be the way to go. Let them deal with put a tight time frame on them and, suspend some sentences of some sort and get out there and get it taken care of, because that's ridiculous. So real quick, one more quick question. How much do they pay for permits every year
I believe it's $250.
to make $208,000? That's a pretty good deal.
Commissioner Hubbs?
Yes, so I was just trying to find out the process, and if we wanted to add something like this to an agenda item, could we do so today then, or future agenda item?
We can't do it with this item. I think we can probably discuss it during future agenda items tomorrow.
Okay.
So it's on my list. We'll discuss it again tomorrow, but for right now, this is just an informational item. Thank you, Jason and Jennifer.
Mr. Chairman, the other item that I mentioned is a program update on the aquatic invasive species program from Karen Vargas. And Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg.
That's okay. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Wallace and Commissioners. What we would like to do is give just a brief update and overview of, for the record, John Schoberg, Fisheries Division Administrator. Quick overview and update on our current aquatic invasive species program. And then at that point, I think we would be ready to move on to agenda item 11, which was linked to that, with some information on the aquatic invasive species plan and planning process. So at this point, I will turn it over to Wildlife Staff Specialist Karen Vargas, who's our aquatic invasive species coordinator for the state of Nevada.
Good afternoon. You know, when you're short, these things don't work very well. Way too short. Well, okay. Thank you for having us today. As John mentioned, we're going to go briefly over the status of the AIS program as it currently stands, and then go into the AIS management plan. Briefly, we're just going to go over a simplification of the AIS decal, the prevention program, which will go over the AIS stations, inspections, decontaminations, outreach, quagga and zebra mussel monitoring in the state, and then go into the management plan. License simplification, basically it took the AIS decal from 4 categories down to 2 categories to simplify it. We took out the resident versus non-resident or out-of-staters category, and that made it into just 2 for one category for motorized and 1 for non-motorized. Basically $12 a year for motorized and $5 a year for non-motorized. It's been estimated that that will be revenue neutral. It's not going to cost the department anything, and it'll become effective January 1st, 2018. And I expect the public to be calling us a lot on that one. So, off to the watercraft inspection stations. This is probably the guts of the whole program right now. There should be a lot more to this program, but the emphasis has been on watercraft inspection stations. Those in the yellow are NDOW stations that we pretty much operate on our own, and those in the red are in cooperation with Nevada State Parks. And then Lake Mead National Recreation Area, of course, we work in concert with the National Park Service. Currently, this year, we're going to have 13 to 14 stations visiting approximately 18 locations. We'll have 2 to 3 rovers, 5 with state parks, 4 at Lake Mead National Recreation Area, and 2 roadsides. I will mention that the Alamo roadside station just opened yesterday. It's open 4 days a week at this point. Hopefully, it will go to 7 days a week in about 2 weeks. That's a brand new station for us this year. I also want to note that the Lake Tahoe region, and I know it's a source of confusion for the public, it is operated, their inspection stations are operated by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. They have authority to operate those stations. NDOW does not operate the stations at Lake Tahoe at all. We do coordinate with Tahoe. We're part of their coordination committee, but we don't have a lot of say in how they operate those stations. So I know people get very confused with that, and I don't blame them. In 2016, the inspections and decontaminations, we did approximately 17,000 inspections last year, 1,000 decontaminations, most of those at Lake Mead. And the stations were open for a total of approximately 2,100 days throughout the year. Lake Mead is the only stations that we have open year-round. The rest of them are seasonal. In 2017, just with about 6 months worth of data and the fact that we now have water, we're at 6,000 inspections right now and about 350 decontaminations. That's going to go up significantly as the summer progresses. And all stations are open 7 days a week, except for Rye Patch is open 4 days a week, Laughlin 4 days, Topaz 4 days, and the Ely Rover. The Ely Rover is the only position I still have left that we have not filled. And had no one apply for it, and getting the Alamo station up and going has been quite the ordeal. We currently have 35 seasonal staff. One of those staff is an actual NDOW employee besides myself. He operates the stations at Lake Mead, oversees those for us. The other 34 are our temporary service employees that we contract through Manpower to hire. And that has actually worked out fairly well for us. Okay, on the outreach, as you recall, you guys passed, the commission passed the pull your plug regulation in December. We're now getting going on that in the last about 2 months, getting going on the outreach for that portion. We are doing not only our inspectors, I mean, you have to figure we had 17,000 or 16,000 inspections, 17,000 inspections last year. If you just say there's 2 people per boat, that's per boat. So those are boats, 17,000 boats. If you take that, multiply it times 2 at a minimum or 2.5, we're looking at, 36, 37, up to 41,000 people that our inspectors are encountering on a yearly basis to provide outreach. That's a lot right there. So we call those watercraft inspection stations, but they are also providing on the ground outreach. In addition to that, the pull your plug, we increased our outreach this year, and we have radio advertising going on in the southern and northern region. We're going to be doing social media. We go through a advertising agency to do that. I don't do that. I wouldn't even know how to do that, but thank goodness. But that should be happening in the next month. We have 6 billboards up, which I'll go through in a minute. And this is an example what you're looking at of our new rack card. One side is the pull your drain plug. The other side is the AIS decal requirements. So we're trying to narrow it down, be a little bit more cost effective in what we hand out to the public. But I love the design of the pull your plug, so I had to put that in there. So these are the billboards. The decal requirement billboard, those are all in the southern region because we have problems with California boaters not wanting to purchase the decal. So they are very much focused down south. The pull your drain plug is focused more up north at this point this year anyway. and we hope to go further with that in the future. We're also talking about putting together a PSA type outreach item that will go up, hopefully with the governor if he has a chance to put it together, and Director Wasley and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. I'm not sure what she's called, but the chairperson or whatever, the lead person up at TRPA. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but hopefully it will. One thing about our outreach, and I want to make sure I say this, is we are currently, given our budget, which is primarily grants, we apply for grants every year. Some of them are competitive, and we are spending, with our grants and our decal, approximately 13 to 18% on outreach. This year it'll be close to 18%. So that's a pretty good chunk of change. Previous years we've spent about 13%. That does not include the inspectors' work that they do. So on the monitoring, good news, we have no new quagga infested waters in Nevada. So that's a plus that the program hopefully is working. I think boaters, most people who boat a lot already are well aware of what's going on, especially if they go out of state. They're getting hammered when they go across state lines. Our biologists, our fisheries biologists, continue to go out and monitor using a plankton net. We do analyze for both quagga and zebra mussels, and we do both a specialized microscope analysis, a laboratory analysis, which we send out for. It's called microscopy. And then the other thing we also do, not for every single sample, but we also do a DNA type analysis, which is called PCR. And that is highly sensitive to picking up anything in the water column. In fact, some would say too sensitive. If you had a chance to look at the plan at all, you saw where we had a classification of water bodies, where we say you just can't go in and say something's positive anymore, or we don't like to. You had to go back and verify that those are true results, that you had some positive results on. New detections across the western states. Arizona last year had, I think 3 or 4 new lakes infested with quagga mussels. Texas, about 3 weeks ago, has another lake infested with zebra mussels, and that connects to other lakes, so they have a real problem in Texas. And of course, Montana, which was a shocker, has 2 lakes that they think are infested with quagga mussels. At least the villagers have been found. Okay, any questions on the stations, the status of the program before we get going on to the management plan, which is agenda item 11?
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Valentine?
Thank you. How do you go about determining whether to decontaminate during your inspections?
Well, one of the things the inspectors do is where are you coming from? If they're coming from Lake Mead and they're trying to launch in Lahontan Reservoir, we're going to check them really well. The other thing is you look to see if there's anything on the boat. One of the big things is if there's any water at all on the boat, that's pretty much an automatic decontamination. Some of them are just engine flushes because they didn't get all the water out of their engine.
For the record, John Shorbert, and just a little follow-up on that, Commissioner Valentine, that's one of the things we hope to get out of the new regulation that requires removal of drain plugs, is that makes it easier. If we get a boat that comes into an inspection station and the drain plug is pulled, it automatically addresses at least part of the problem, was the potential that they came from somewhere and have residual water in the boat still in the bilge or bait wells or whatever that might be contaminated with veligers that we can't see. So the action of having the drain plug removal regulation in place is a big asset in terms of immediately addressing some of those concerns we have in inspections.
Commissioner Johnston?
I guess a question more directed from my neck of the woods. I noticed Topaz has some inspection site there at Topaz. Is there ways to work with California to have things going on at Bridgeport? I mean,
Yeah, and yeah, that's a good question. California is operating completely different than any of the other western states, their program. It usually comes, their programs are established more at the county level, whereas all the other states, everything's done at the state level, if that makes sense. They have a huge program at the state level, but they do not implement any of the stations. So it would be more working with the county, which, what county is that in Mono?
yeah, it's Mono County.
Mono, yeah.
I mean, they might feel like, what do we care, you know, it's all going downstream into,
Well, California does have they have a new decal of their own that they charge their watercraft, and so people can apply for grants. So if the county is interested, or it can be private landowners, you know, a marina at Topaz or something like that. Because you're right, at Topaz, we're only on one little section of the lake, and Rye Patch is another one where we're only at one section of the lake. We're not at the northern end of the lake at all. So the system is not foolproof by any means, especially at Lake Mead. Lake Mead, the inspections are not mandatory, so people can leave during the middle of the night. I mean, there's still a lot of risk out there.
Further questions from the commission on agenda item number 10 before we move on to agenda item 11? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 11, draft Nevada Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan, Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg and Wildlife Staff Specialist Karen Vargas for possible action. The commission will hear a report on Nevada's Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan, AIS plan. The AIS plan is intended to provide guidance to AIS control and prevention programs in the state of Nevada and enhance coordination and effectiveness of AIS control efforts in Nevada and regionally through establishment of an interagency Nevada Aquatic Invasive Species Working Group. The commission may take action to provide recommendations for modification of the draft for the August meeting. Ms. Vargas.
For the record, this is Karen Vargas, Nevada Department of Wildlife Fisheries Division, Wildlife Staff Specialist, Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator. The AIS Management Plan, we're going to go through. It's a big plan. If you had a chance to look at it, by the time it's done, it's probably going to be around 100 pages. So the purpose of the plan is basically to provide this broader, this umbrella, so to speak, for the direction for the program to go in and hold a program accountable. I think it's very important for that, but it's an umbrella type plan. It's not that boots on the ground, which we have already been doing quite a bit of. One of the other things it does is that it helps us work with other western states. It'll bring it together a little bit better. It will provide, from the federal perspective, a little bit more in grant funding. To the amount right now, it's about $41,000 a year. It's not a lot of money, but it is something. And it'll also lead to program consistency and a general direction for the program to go in and hold it accountable, as I mentioned. One of them, the plan is more coming from the federal level, and all states have been requested to develop one of these plans. And the people that oversee this are called the ANS Task Force, or the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. They are given the authority under the basically the Non-Native Aquatic Nuisance Prevention and Control Act, which was reauthorized by the National Invasive Species Act in 1996. The task force itself is made up of 13 agencies, including the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Ag, EPA, USGS, National Park Service, BLM, all sorts of, about every federal agency you can think of. There are 13 members, there's 13 federal agencies, and then about 14 other members. Other members include things like the Great Lakes Commission, TRPA is now a member of it, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And the whole task force is chaired and co-chaired by the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA. And basically, they're responsible for looking at waters of the U.S. and the prevention, introduction, and spread of aquatic invasive species, and look for pathways and risk assessments. So, and this is the important slide right here. This is there are 6 regional panels set up by the task force. If you notice at the western, where Nevada is, the western panel, we are an incredibly active group, and I probably shouldn't say it, but we are the most active group out of everybody in the U.S. We have, we're trying to, and this has been going on for several years, building consensus in the West. We try to make, and voters would love this, because we're trying to make all the rules and regulations consistent across states, which you have no idea how difficult that is. It's nearly impossible, but we have produced a lot of documents, and we do things like, what's the minimum protocol to monitor? What's the minimum protocol and training that an inspector has to go through? So no other regional panel has done this, and I'm proud to be a part of that group, and so I think we've done great. So if you look at management plans across the U.S., Nevada is one of the last ones to submit a plan. Our program did not even start until 2011. Most people were up and running like 2007, 2008 in the West. We were a few years behind. There are 41 approved state plans right now, and as you can tell, they're interagency or interstate plans like Lake Tahoe Interstate Plan, which is their own AIS plan. If you look at our management plan, we acknowledge Tahoe's plan. We don't override it. We don't have jurisdiction over Lake Tahoe. We just acknowledge that their plan, and we accept it, and we will coordinate with them. So they are 2 different plans. So our plan, for the most part, excludes Lake Tahoe. The process to develop the plan, okay, it's from the task force. All of the protocols basically, or procedures, the process comes from the task force. This is all authority in act that tells us what has to be in the plan. We aren't basically making all of this stuff up. What we did right off the bat was we retained a contractor to assist us with the writing up of the plan. And then from there, we put together a task force, or not a task force, we put together a committee to go through the plan process to give us that first input. It consisted of, I'll go through the list, but federal and state agencies both. The whole process itself is, we're right at the Wildlife Commission, that's where we're at right now, in the public review. And we are looking for the public's input on this. The public input, there's a place at the back of the plan where all public input will go. If we need to change something within the plan, we can do that. It'll be up to the committee and, of course, NDOW to do that. Once that is done, and if the commission signs off on it, it then goes to the governor's office, and the governor then submits it to the task force. NDOW does not submit it to the task force. The governor has to do it. And the task force, once it gets to the task force, they meet in the spring and the fall usually, and it takes them about 90 days to approve it. So that's kind of the process. The major elements of the plan, and these are major. Coordination, which basically is the actions the AIS coordinator is going to take in the state, or who else is responsible, things like Department of Ag for plants, aquatic plants. It's not necessarily NDOW, it could be Department of Ag, so it provides different authorities as well. Prevention, of course, as I mentioned before, most of the prevention right now has been on boat inspections and decontaminations, but it can be other things like the aquarium trade and the pet industry. Early detection and monitoring. Right now, we are focused primarily on quagga and zebra mussels, but it should be a whole lot of other monitoring that's going on because we have a lot of other threats that are occurring. Rapid response, once this plan is approved, that's the next step that has to happen. You have to have something together, and it has to be a lot of different agencies to come together if you get an introduction of something to you have to act very rapidly. You can't wait 60 days for bureaucracy to come together. You have to be able to go in and move and contain whatever is coming in. Control and eradication is also something that we haven't been able to touch.
Well, not for certain things.
no.
For other things we do.
Yeah. But as far as the AIS, it hasn't been a lot of stuff. So our committee that we put together, and we had about, I think, 2 in-house meetings and numerous conference calls. These are the people who put together the plan, basically, or provided their comments and suggestions. We had National Park Service at Lake Mead, Nevada State Parks, Nevada State Lands, Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Ag, Division of Environmental Protection, US EPA, Southern Nevada Water Authority, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Carson River Subconservancy, BLM. We also had Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe, UNR, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Natural Heritage Foundation, and others. It was a pretty big group. We met, as I mentioned, 3 times. Not everybody had the same expertise or background to provide comments, but at least we got a little ways with it. The critical content of the plan is, of course, the geographic scope. Authorities, a lot on who has authorities and how they have the authorities, so all the legal status of who has what authority. Problem definition and ranking of species and pathways. That's one of the major components of the plan. The management approach, plan oversight and implementation table. To me, the implementation table is the guts of the plan because that's the action items. That's what you're going to do. It's not just saying what you're going, it's saying what your actions are going to be to improve. It talks about the gaps and challenges, which there's a lot of them, and public comments and program evaluation. And John, I'll let you
Okay.
take the last one.
Thank you. For the record, John Schoberg, Fisheries Division Administrator, Department of Wildlife. So, in summary, and we mentioned we're one of the few states that does not have an approved statewide aquatic invasive species plan. It's important for a number of reasons that that Karen mentioned before, but there are several aspects of this. Consistent guidance for the program, both by us and others, because quite frankly, with the exception of the Tahoe Basin and the program they have there through TRPA, the burden of what is a very massive potential problem that has serious potential effects on water resources in the state, on aquatic wildlife, on a whole variety of things, has pretty much been left up to us. It's been left up to NDOW, and we've done the best job we can of implementing that with assistance from a number of cooperators. But the hope with this plan is that it will provide consistent guidance and it will help us bring some of these other critical partners in to help move ahead with really strategic programs that will allow us to effectively address the problems. I think we've been as effective as we can be with the resources we have. We've also been pretty lucky. And part of that has been we've been lucky because we've been on it, and when we have had situations where we've had potential risks and potential introductions, we've been able to get on that and follow up on it and determine whether or not it was a real risk, and then proceed accordingly. But that's a key element of this plan, is bringing in this consistent guidance, consistent structure, and the ability to bring in more partners to help us get this work done. Another key part of this is this coordination with other states and regional efforts. Whether we like it or not, Southern Nevada is ground zero for a lot of the potential AIS problems in the western United States because of the introduction that occurred undetected in Lake Mead in somewhere around 2007 that then spread to the bulk of the lower Colorado River system and serves as a source for potential introductions to other parts of the western United States. That coordination is critical. We work closely with other states. This plan will help us enhance that. We'll have better structures in place to help us do that. We work closely with not only other states, but regional groups like Karen mentioned, like the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission,
They're great people.
who are great to work with. They have just alarming concerns about the Columbia River system and the potential for vessels moving from the Colorado River system in Nevada, California, and Arizona and getting up to the Pacific Northwest. Some of the things that we've done recently, such as the inspection stations, the highway stations that we're trying to implement, because those will be more effective in catching vessels that might be through traffic rather than going to destination waters in Nevada where we focused before. Those are key elements in helping them, but this plan will help us bring together in a more coherent manner and really help them address what some of those regional problems are. And then finally, although at this point it's a relatively minor element of this, and right now we really have no idea what is going on with the federal government, quite frankly, in some of these areas, there is the potential that this will help us generate some additional funding to support the program that comes associated with having an approved plan. So that at least gives us a little more resources for us, because right now we are, if I may say so, largely dependent on the kindness of strangers to run this program, because it's mostly funded with federal grants that we're able to match with revenue from the Aquatic Invasive Species Watercraft decal. So there's multiple elements to this. We think it is really important. We appreciate the Commission's interest in taking a look at this, providing us input, giving a forum so that we can get additional public input, refine the plan, and our hope is to bring it back to you in August as a final document, and with the Commission's review and approval, it could then go forward to the Governor's office for their review, hopefully approval, and then approval by the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. And at that point, we would welcome any questions or discussion.
Commissioner Drew? Yeah, I appreciate the presentation and also the draft plan, and I just wanted to bring up one point that the Carson Cab had mentioned to me in a phone call after their meeting, and that was the concept of reciprocity. And I think what they're getting more at is trying to be more consistent amongst maybe the neighboring states and amongst what's going on with TRPA. And I'm not going to try and relay their exact position, but it may be worth an outreach to their chairman just to make sure we capture their comments more adequately. But I wanted to put that on the record since they did give me a call and indicate that they had a comment on that. So.
And Karen Vargas, for the record, I think we can easily incorporate that in the plan. That is one of the things that the Western Regional Panel, that's the whole purpose of why we're meeting. But we've been doing that for years now. And in Nevada, as John mentioned, because of Lake Mead, we're kind of at the bottom for reciprocity. We're going to be the last to see it, basically. Arizona will too, and Texas, of course, but I mean now Montana probably, but it's going to have to change. I think the boaters are going to demand it, and we don't. I know NDOW, we do not want to scare our boaters away or make it miserable for them. So I think it's something definitely that we need to add to the plan, the draft plan, and not guaranteeing we can do anything because we have no control over other people's, authorities or whatever. But I think it's a good idea.
Understood. And I think maybe just a blurb on, something about what you just said, and maybe an action that says you'll work towards that with the knowledge that
I agree. I'm fine.
you can't
I
change
think
in
it'll
other states.
work out well.
Further questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner Hubbs?
Yeah, I had some questions in regard to, just reading some of the titles here, obviously looking a lot at the climate change issues cited in the report and the mention by Mr. Schoberg, in terms of federal funds. Are there, I mean, where are we at right now, and what do you receive and what could be at risk if programs are taken away from a federal perspective?
The whole if basically, yes, if we did not receive any federal funding, which we're receiving federal funding from Fish and Wildlife Service, a little bit from National Park Service, and now a little bit from Bureau of Reclamation. If those monies go away, our program would probably at least cut in half, because the decal does not cover enough money. The decal does not bring in enough money to cover the current program. We would be in pretty bad shape.
For the record, John Schoberg, just to add to that a little bit, for example, a significant amount of the funding that we have, and I believe this is for the Lake Mead program, primarily the Colorado River program, is what they call QZAP funds, which are specifically, it's a funding source for invasive species specifically. I believe that the President's FY18 budget still fully funds that, but we don't know. Nobody knows at this point what's going to happen to a lot of those programs. And that funds, either directly or by getting filtered through the Park Service, similar funding, funds most of what we do on the Colorado River system. In the northern part of the state, a lot of our program is covered through the boating access program from Fish and Wildlife Service. That's relatively secure because it's a portion of the same funding that supplies sport fish restoration funds. So that's relatively secure. For example, then other agencies have been able to find a little extra in their budget to help us out, like Bureau of Reclamation is kicking in at least a small amount of money this year to help with Lahontan and Rye Patch because they operate those reservoirs. I don't think a lot of the federal agencies are potentially going to have much discretionary funding going forward. So those little pots of money that add up to something pretty useful could be the highest risk. The QZAP funding is probably the next tier of risk, and the sport fish restoration funding through boat access is probably relatively secure. But if we lost those federal sources, as Karen said, we'd be at 50% or less of what we currently need to operate the program.
Right now, the program, the Karen Vargas for the record, the program runs about $700,000 a year. That's, plus or minus. And this is our first year with water, so it's getting fully tested this year for how many staff we need. That was hard to predict in the previous years. And the QZAP money that John mentioned, that is a competitive grant. I had to basically lobby to get that every year, and so far they've been fine with giving us what we asked for the most part, but that money, those funds are getting very, very competitive on a yearly basis. So that's the Lake Mead funding. And yeah, we would have problems because the decal just does not cover all of it.
And then just one other question I had when I was looking at some of the methodology, I thought I can't remember the exact page, but you're not checking boats coming in, only boats going out. Is that right?
No. When see, that's where it's more complex in Nevada. Everybody else gets to check everybody coming in. At Lake Mead, we're checking boats going out. At Laughlin, we're checking boats coming out because the quagga mussels are all along the Colorado River. So all those sites along the Colorado River, we're checking boats going out. At all of our other lakes and reservoirs, we're checking them going in. So we have, basically, it's two different approaches going on.
Further questions or comments from the commission? Seeing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment.
John Hyatt with the Clark County CAB. I think the whole issue of invasive species is incredibly important, and arguably invasive species overall maybe forms the greatest threat to Nevada's wildlife of anything that we have, and we have been remiss in not addressing it earlier on. That said, with regard to the aquatic invasive species thing, We talk mainly here about quagga mussels and so on, which are unintentional introductions, but we also have intentional introductions. Virtually every stream and warm spring in the southern part of the state that I know about has non-native fish species, fish and aquatic invertebrate species introduced into it. Most of these are coming out of the pet trade. People get tired of it. They buy these fish, they have them in their aquarium, and then they're tired of it. They don't want to flush them down the toilet. They don't want to kill them, so they say, oh, we'll just take them out and put them in Rogers Spring or someplace. It's nice and warm there. They'll like it. And now we have all of these invasives. So we need to somehow address the pet trade and provide a mechanism when people get tired of their aquatic pets, that there's a way for them to return them to where they got them, or some other way that they can dispose of them in a way that they feel good. Because this in large part is about people just not wanting to kill things. So we need to look at it as a way that people can dispose of their unwanted pets in a responsible fashion. And I think that needs to be part of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
For the record, Paul Dixon Clark. One other question I had, and the plan was long, and I don't think I read it as carefully as I could. I asked John whether or not plant as well as vertebrates, if plants is in there, because the invasive plants we have in some of our ponds, lakes, or the reservoirs is an issue. And I didn't read that, and I didn't bring it with me today, but I just wanted to know.
Yeah, for the record, John Schoberg, thanks, Paul. The plan does address key aquatic invasive plant species, and those are addressed in the plan. And similarly, although the primary focus for a lot of it is on watercraft and things like quagga zebra mussels and similar invasives, it does address other concerns for things like the pet trade and other introductions. Those are things that we also handle through other programs like simply our biology, our management programs, as well as the IS program, where we have persistent invasive species on the landscape that affect individual species. But those are addressed in the plan at some level. I think we all recognize the concerns about the pet trade and the issues there, and certainly aquatic invasive plants are and continue to be an issue that require effort. We've seen some huge problems on the lower Colorado River with things like giant Sylvinia and other plants that aren't even here yet, and we don't want them. So yes, it is addressed, and I think if there's specific comments from the public or from the commission that would help us, enhance how that's addressed in the plan, we'd like to get those and see how we can incorporate them into the final plan. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Further public comment before I bring it back to the commission? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or a possible motion. Nothing from the commission. Okay. I think we will see it again back on the August agenda for approval then. So we'll close agenda item number 11. Open agenda item number 12, reports informational. Section A, update on the 79th legislative session 2017. Commissioner Drew, an update will be provided on the 79th legislative session. Commissioner Drew.
So as of June 6th, the legislative session has been over. Is that adequate? So I think what we did is made a nice, in celebration of the June 6th end of session, we've made a festive spreadsheet for everyone in the support material. Essentially, the bills that are still in black text are those that got resolved after our deadline for support material. Those in red are bills that did not pass or were vetoed, and those bills that are highlighted in green are those that have passed and since been signed into law. So maybe what I could do is just step through the list of bills quickly that were still pending as of our last commission meeting. So AB 29 was specific to off-highway vehicles. You'll see it on the screen in black. That actually has since been passed, delivered to, and signed by the governor and is now state law. In terms of our committee positioner platform, I think overall the program is going to improve. They did not add NDOW as an ex officio member, and some of the provisions in terms of grants probably aren't as strong as I would have liked to have seen them. But I think overall the changes that were made under AB 29 are going to be beneficial to the OHV program going forward and provide some better consistency. I don't know that there's anything the commission necessarily has to do going forward, but at some point it may not hurt to have the sportsman representative from that commission come in and update this board and commission in terms of what that OHV commission is doing, especially now that they have kind of a new management structure. AB 101 obviously had a lot of discussion. This was the predator fee bill. A lot of the concerns that we had identified and suggested changes were incorporated into the final bill. But the final bill, I think every vote that was taken on it was completely partisan, and I think that's probably the primary reason for the governor's veto on May 25th, 2017. So as of this time, there is no change or anything the commission has to alter at this point in terms of the predator management fee. AB 138 was de minimis collection of precipitation. So if you'll recall, this was one of two bills dealing with guzzlers. AB 138 was passed and signed into law, and essentially it states that guzzlers do not need a water right so long as development is coordinated and approved by NDOW. And then there's a couple provisions. The guzzler can't exceed 20,000 gallons in capacity, can't have more than a quarter mile of piping, or an apron size that exceeds 1 acre. So if any of those provisions aren't met, it would potentially kick, a large guzzler or one with an extensive piping system into a water right situation. But I think a high percentage of those already in place would fall well under that threshold and those criteria. AB 209, this was a water bill that we did not take a position on, was passed. SB 47 was the same. Those were more technical water right bookkeeping type bills. SB 51, kind of the same story there. 74, again, the provisions that were specific to guzzlers got rolled into AB 138. And essentially what they did is took all the provisions from both bills, stuffed them into one, and passed it. So 75 was a department bill in terms of confidentiality of folks reporting nuisance wildlife claims. That bill did pass and was signed by the governor, will become effective on July 1st. SB 197 and 198 both dealt with extending bonding deadlines for the Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, as well as the natural resource bond that was approved, I think, clear back in 2001. So both of those have been passed and signed into law, and obviously good for funding support for wildlife in the department. SB 221, provisions governing wildlife. This was started out as the Wildlife Public Education Wildlife Council and merged into a committee. As you'll recall, it was getting towards late in the session when it got out of the Senate. It did get a hearing on the Assembly side, but never came up for a committee vote. So in addition to no committee or council in regards to public education on wildlife, there was also no subsequent changes to the heritage account and how that program is administered going forward. SB 364 had to do with trapping and taking of certain animals. It did pass and become law. It's effective July 1st. Probably the most pertinent piece of this is that it does now once again mandate trap registration. And for each trap that gets registered, you must be accompanied by a $5 fee. So my assumption on that is that the commission will probably have to look at developing or at least polishing up the regulation that it had previously adopted in terms of how registration is administered through the department. There is a hitch on that, I guess, in that if a trapper elects not to register their trap with the Department of Wildlife, they can still put their name and address on the trap in lieu of a registration number. That's something that the commission was opposed to, something that wasn't changed. In regards to trap visitation time, nothing changed on that, and the ability to set that visitation time still resides with the commission. It's the same scenario where there's a maximum 96-hour cap, but the decision on any changes to that are now still with the commission. And there's one other provision that's probably more pertinent to the department than the commission, and that is in regards to providing signage in those areas where there's a state agency that manages public lands. So Director Wosley, that may be something you update the commission on, and I don't know, to what level the commission would need to adopt any sort of regulation, but maybe a platforms for some input if you need it on that. SB 370, provisions governing the transportation of game hunters and hunting equipment. This was a bill specific to transporting game or equipment by helicopter, and originally the bill had talked about any aircraft and was later amended to only include helicopters. But essentially what this does is eliminates the loophole where you could designate an isolated piece of private land and get it designated as a heliport. So basically it says you can transport by helicopter to a heliport so long as the heliport's accessible by a public road. And so it gets us away from a case where the only way in and out of a heliport is by the helicopter, and I think that's probably more pertinent to places like the Toyabis and or Ruby Mountains. SB 411 was in regards to feral cat colonies. It was changed more to an abandonment deal where the trap, spay, and release programs were still permitted, but I think a lot of the language in terms of feral cat colonies went away or was changed out of that bill. SB 511 obviously was a big bill, one that we had tracked for a long time and had a lot of input in. That was the fee license simplification and AIS simplification, and it also was amended to include the landowner cap provision that we talked about at our last meeting. That bill actually passed with about 24 hours left in the session with a pretty wide margin. I think it was 21-0 in the Senate and like 34-8 or something like that in the Assembly. But essentially, different parts of that bill will take effect going forward. But maybe the most pressing item was the landowner cap change is effective upon approval. So at this point, the cap is 2.5% rather than the 1.5% that was creating some problems as we discussed at our last meeting. So just maybe extend some gratitude to the department and everyone who's involved in that effort, because it was a huge bill and it did take a lot of effort to get it pushed through. A lot of support as well from members of the Senate and Assembly as well as the governor's office. So just a lot of thank yous and good jobs to go around on SB 511. SGR 12 rescinded Senate Joint Resolution number 1 of the 78th session that had to do with the transfer of public lands to state ownership. So kind of an interesting turn of events on that one. It did pass with plenty of time to spare. And then SGR 13, which is one that kind of started with this commission in terms of supporting the recommendations of the National Blue Ribbon Panel. It's something that also has state legislative support for it too. Two bills that failed to meet the Friday deadline on May 19th, AB 298. So that was the kind of omnibus water bill that had a whole bunch of different provisions. Of key interest to us was some of the definitions specific to environmental soundness and 3M or monitor, manage, and mitigate plans. This one got a little bit contentious. There were some large work sessions that were put together, and ultimately the different interests just couldn't get to a point where everyone was on the same page with not only the contents of the bill, but what should even be contemplated in the bill. I anticipate there will be work in the interim on the concepts contained in this bill, whether it's developing regulations that define some of the terms that were contemplated in AB 298, or developing some sort of legislative package for next session in regards to the state engineer's purview on the 3M plans. And then SB 116 is one that Chief Game Warden Turnipseed had worked a fair amount on in terms of revising provisions governing warning against trespass. So you'll remember there was an addition for cultivated lands there. Clark County had added some language on signage, and they did incorporate our comments in terms of making sure that signs were visible from one to the other, but it did not meet the deadline when it got over to the assembly side. So in a nutshell, that's how things came out. It was a tumultuous session, to say the least. I don't know that I've ever seen a session quite as partisan as this one, and there was certainly some north-south rifts. But overall, given those challenges, I think from the standpoint of the department and this commission, things came out, to be quite honest, in my opinion, with 511 and SJR 13 quite well at the end of the day. And just, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank NDOW staff who took an awful lot of time out of their normal everyday duties to deal with the legislature and support what we were trying to do as a commission, but also my legislative committee. Greg Smith, I think, is the only member of that committee that isn't here today, and the commission for entrusting me to carry forward our positions and platforms to the legislature. So that's what I had, Chairman, unless there's any specific questions I can try to answer.
Well, I first off want to thank you for all you did and the time you dedicated to that, not only that committee, but to the legislature and everything in general. But thank you very much for all your hard work on that. It's very much appreciated from my position, and I'm sure everyone else on the commission as well. So, any questions for Commissioner Drew? Commissioner Johnston?
I just want to say, Jeremy, we're all going to miss you when your term expires, but we are going to miss you most in 2 years, unless you may stay on the legislative committee. So at least keep that.
Already with the lobbying. My office is way too close to the legislative building, so.
That Commissioner Johnson, I think, is leaving the door open.
He can use my office space in Yerington if that helps things.
I might.
All right, barring any other questions for Commissioner Drew, we'll close agenda item 12A and move to agenda item 12B, Administrative Procedures, Regulations, and Policy Committee Report. Commissioner and Committee Chairman David McNinch. The Commission will hear a report on the committee's recent meeting. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. We attempted to have a meeting last night. We ran into some technical difficulties, so the committee was not able to take any action. But just in an effort to refresh the conversation and refresh ourselves, we did have some conversations relative to the petitions. And it's part of our rules of practice, and just as a reminder to the commission, basically we had, the committee had conversations on petitions and processing them. We'd had some public comments, some concerns, suggestions for improvement. So we ran it through the commission in an effort to modify our policy so we could submit it to the Secretary of State like we're required to. During those conversations, it was suggested to us that we, because we were proposing maybe a little more significant modifications to the policy, that we consider taking a look at Nevada Administrative Code and modifying it. So that's the step that we took. We were heading down that process, and there are a number of questions that the committee has not so much struggled with, but there's been some conversation about what initiates rulemaking, what initiates what role the department plays, what role the commission plays. There is a statute associated that kind of dictates that we have to have these processes. We have to process petitions in a certain time frame. And so without bogging down into too much detail, I think the takeaway from the meeting last night was we will have another meeting on July 17th to discuss our petitions. We will be in consultation with with our DAGs to get a feel for, answer some of these questions, some of the thoughts that the committee had, some of the questions that the committee had on what initiates the rulemaking, submittals, kind of the timing of the whole thing, and bring that back to our August meeting with some suggested changes. So nothing to really look at today, just kind of getting the process going, and very much appreciate Jordan's organizational skills, and I'm really looking forward to moving on. I know she's gonna take us down the road where we can get this stuff completed in a timely manner from this point. So I'm confident we're going to be in really good hands and really good shape there. So I don't know if any of the committee members had anything they'd like to add without opening up a huge discussion, but that's kind of the update at this point.
Commissioner Hubbs?
I was just thinking from that meeting, we were also considering what a submission was. I had that written down too. That was one of the questions we were going to ask the DAG. And then also kind of, I don't know if we would highlight that we have talked about the tentative schedule and how at some point there may seem like there's a lot of different things coming down the pipe really quickly, and it's because of the scheduling that's been discussed.
Thank you, Commissioner Hubbs. There's a proposed schedule, and again, the committee wasn't able to take any action, but generally, Jordan's proposed a schedule that would make us a little, it'll seem kind of hectic for a few meetings, but she's kind of organized the policies that we'll take into consideration so that we're not overloading any one meeting with anything super complicated. It's she believes that it's pretty manageable, and I agree with her. I think that it'll be something that we'll be able to move forward with, but that's a good point that while we might be considering something for a second time, we're going to be rolling a handful through for the first time, and that might cross over in the same meeting. So we might have 5-6 policies that we're dealing with in some fashion at each meeting, and for 2 or 3, 4 meetings that might be the case, and we'll see if we can get through these things. So it's a good point.
Thank you, Commissioner McNinch. Any further questions from the commission? Seeing none, we'll close agenda item 12B and move to agenda item 12C, Department Activity Report, Secretary Wosley. Secretary Wosley will provide a report on recent departmental activities.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. I guess I'd like to start by acknowledging Commissioner Drew's efforts at the legislature and even beyond. And I believe most people in this room are aware that this is his last official commission meeting, although he has obligated himself to attend the August meeting to afford us the opportunity to honor him a little more officially. But you know, the teamwork, the representation of the commission was just outstanding this legislative session. Commissioner Drew has been through probably more sessions than most of us. And I can't tell you how comforting it is to be aligned with the commission and be working side by side on these issues. And I'd like to echo the sentiments of Vice Chair Johnston that we will certainly miss Commissioner Drew every day, but especially in 2 years. I'd like to acknowledge that it is just a few minutes after 3, and there's only a couple agenda items left, and it's really hot outside, so I'm going to take my time and going through this department activity report, maybe dive a little deeper than I did last time when we were short on time. I'll start with the update from the Director's Office. The department's wrapping up a major strategic planning effort. This includes training and facilitation of new agency-wide strategic plan with assistance to implement the plan with buy-in throughout agency personnel. Divisional strategic plans are also being developed, and the department hopes to complete and implement new plans as early as next month. Commissioner Drew already covered most of the legislative stuff. I won't rehash that. The department is in the midst of a RFP. There are some efforts underway to modernize some of our license sales. A decision will be made on that effort by next month as well. On June 21st, the Legislative Commission met and approved Commission General Regulation 464 on appeals and Commission General Regulation 467, the Special Assistance Permit. CGR 464 resolves a few problems with the appeals process before the Commission. The changes provide more flexibility with scheduling, avoids conflicts with one AG advising two sides of an issue, clarifies the limited jurisdiction of the Commission, and requires notification of legal representation. CGR 467 prescribes the circumstances under which a person may assist in the killing and retrieval of a wounded big game animal by another person who, one, is a paraplegic, has had one or both legs amputated, or has suffered a paralysis of one or both legs which severely impedes the person's walking, and two, has obtained a valid tag issued by the Department of Wildlife for hunting that animal. These regulations became effective on June 21st, 2017. The Game Division, Nevada has experienced a somewhat mysterious sudden death of isolated elk for several years in the northeastern part of the state during late spring. 3 radio-collared cow elk have perished since May 1st in the Tuscarora area. To date, we've struggled getting samples collected quickly enough to complete a full battery of testing due to the delay associated with mortality signals coming from the collars. Despite testing for anthrax, EHD, blue tongue, and poisonous plants, no clearly identified cause has been isolated. Currently, consumption of a toxic plant is the prevailing theory, but is yet to be confirmed. Bear activity has been increasing in the Tahoe Basin. Multiple bears have been captured and relocated, including 2 yearling bears that may have been offspring of the female inadvertently killed by Washoe County Sheriff's Office. Another bear was euthanized after breaking into a home, and yet another bear was found within a home and apparently knocked a person to the ground in its efforts to escape from the home when surprised by that homeowner returning. The individual experienced some minor injuries. Nevada will be hosting multiple WAFWA-sanctioned workshops over the next couple years. Western Wild Turkey Workshop will be held in April 2018. The Biennial Pronghorn Workshop will be held in Reno also the summer of 18. The Desert Bighorn Council will be held in Mesquite during the week of April 15th in 2019. We'll also be hosting a similar event for law enforcement professionals. The Game Division anticipates receipt of a report from the University of Montana regarding peer review of our mule deer management program. The department contracted the review to provide an outside view of division activities to determine how we might continue to make improvements to our successful program. And we just received that report earlier this week. Meetings have been underway among the department, the Nevada Department of Transportation, and Nevada Highway Patrol to address frequent bighorn sheep vehicle collisions along the highway near Hawthorne. This is along the alignment likely to be addressed through construction of Interstate 11, but that's decades in the future. In the meantime, 8 to 15 bighorn sheep are being struck on the highway annually. Fencing, signage, speed reduction, and herd reductions are being considered to limit collisions. As many states recognize, addressing public safety situations on highways can be challenging and expensive to address. In the Fisheries Division, we just heard an update on the AIS program, the AIS plan. I will reiterate a little bit. It's fully operational for this summer boating season with new roadside inspection station in Alamo and a new location in Elko on the Mountain City Highway are both now in place. Traffic has been relatively light in most locations so far, but should pick up with warmer weather coming. Staff so far this year have completed over 5,400 inspections and 3,000 decontaminations. I think we saw more current numbers in that report, 70% of those at Lake Mead and Mojave. Marketing for the new regulation requiring pulling the drain plugs, we also heard about that. Initial concerns over flooding at Mason Valley Hatchery were alleviated due to a revised forecast, but new projections for flows in the Walker River suggest a peak at near 3,000 CFS by the last week of this month. This is about 2.5 feet above flood stage and has the potential for minor flooding of the hatchery building and residences. However, it's dependent on actual snow melt, and the forecast has low confidence for timing and magnitude. Taking advantage of great reservoir water conditions this year, we've completed additional stocking of warm water fish in multiple waters across northern Nevada, including channel catfish for Willow Creek, South Fork, Wild Horse, Jakes Creek, Rye Patch, Squaw Reservoir, and multiple urban ponds. Wipers were also stocked in Lahontan and Rye Patch reservoirs. Catfish stocking in Clark County urban ponds was completed for spring through June and will begin again in August or September when temperatures allow. Water conditions in other areas of the state, including the White Mountains, Lincoln, and Nye counties, are also expected to be better than average. Crappie fishing has been great at Kirch Wildlife Management Area, Lincoln County reservoirs, and Lake Mead. The latest BOR forecast is predicting that Lake Mead will be nearly stable for the next 2 years with only about a 10-foot annual change in elevation. Because of conditions from this winter, access to Marlette Lake for rainbow and cutthroat trout spawning is essentially impossible. Snow drifts of up to 10 feet were still blocking the access road early this month, and because lake levels were dropped this winter to protect the dam, a large delta has built up in front of the spawning stream, preventing access for fish. Fortunately, we had reserved rainbow trout eggs from a private vendor just in case, which should make up program needs for this year. Western Region staff are working with the owner of Squaw Reservoir to address maintenance issues on the dam and improve access for anglers. Wet spring conditions are creating other access issues. For example, roads are passable up to Knott Creek and Onion reservoirs, but a huge boulder rolled onto the road that goes up to the Blue Lakes trailhead, probably limiting access to ATVs only. High stream flows have also been limiting field activities such as stream survey and amphibian monitoring efforts. Staff are continuing to work with State of Utah and other partners to develop a range-wide conservation strategy for spring snails in Nevada and Utah. Over 30 species may be facing a listing decision by the Fish and Wildlife Service by 2020. An initial meeting with partners to develop an agreement was held on June 13th, and we hope to have a completed agreement by this fall, followed by a detailed conservation strategy. The Habitat Division, Habitat staff continue to review and finalize a large number of FY18 project proposals. In addition to the 13 wildlife heritage proposals, 7 duck stamp and 15 upland game bird stamp, and approximately 30 habitat conservation fee project proposals have been submitted to date, requesting over $2 million in annual funding. As we discussed earlier, that is strictly on the sportsman revenue side of things. That doesn't include the match that they'll garner. Nevada Partners for Conservation and Development Project effectiveness monitoring crews began work in May, and the crews have already surveyed approximately 175 plots associated with projects in the Pine Nuts, China Camp, and Great Basin National Park. With the passage of the revised industrial artificial pond permit regulation in the fall of 16, each of the existing 88 active permits are to be modified by July of 17 to ensure full implementation of the new regulation. The primary goal of the regulation change was to improve cost recovery efforts for the permitting program by revising the assessment fee structure. NDOW continues to coordinate with the Nevada Division of State Parks on the recently legislatively approved donation of 3 properties along the East Walker River. Walker River State Recreation Area will bring in excess of 12,000 acres into public use while providing 28 miles of river access. Together with historic structures, valuable wildlife habitat, the Pitchfork, Rafter 7, Flying N, and 9 Mile ranches will serve as 4 distinct park units supplying camping, hiking, wildlife viewing, outdoor recreation, and fishing opportunities. The Habitat Division continues work on habitat restoration and rehabilitation strategic framework and geographic information system tool. The effort will help NDOW prioritize and portray wildlife-driven habitat values and beneficial projects to the public and conservation partners, presenting clear and transparent priorities to ensure NDOW and our partners' priorities align, or at least consider other conservation efforts in the region. The Northern Water Development Crew finished up the volunteer construction season with a new big game build in the Hoppin Peaks north of Winnemucca. So far this year, the crew and its dedicated volunteer force has constructed 3 new big game guzzlers and completely rebuilt 3 existing big game guzzlers. The Law Enforcement Division, Nevada is proud to announce that we're celebrating 100 years of the state game warden. Early references to the Office of Nevada State Game Warden appear to begin in 1917. We've taken the opportunity to give out some commemorative badge pins, kind of a tie-tack. It's a 1917 to 2017 100-year anniversary of the Nevada State Game Warden logo. We're seeing several elk poaching cases from recent years come full circle with arrests, trials, and sentencing. All of these cases involve trophy bull elk from eastern Nevada, and all suspects are non-residents who came to Nevada. Nevada area is known for producing big bulls. There may be some redundancy in some of these. You've heard some of these reports, but I believe a few of these are new and some of them might have additional details. A Utah man was sentenced mid-April for the felony killing and waste of a bull elk near Pioche back in August of 2015. Zachary Holdaway, 26 of Cedar City, was ordered to pay a $20,000 civil penalty and $576 in additional fees. Holdaway will lose all hunting and fishing license privileges for 6 years. He was given a suspended sentence of 32 months in state prison and ordered to serve 5 years on probation. This was a very lengthy investigation and one of the biggest civil penalties we've seen. The case generated a lot of public interest and big-time media attention all around the world. The elk was killed at night with a spotlight, without a tag, on private land, without permission, and was left to waste after the head was removed. Holdaway had just completed a multi-year license revocation for prior big game violations in Utah. 2 Wisconsin men were recently arrested at their residence for charges relating to the killing of a large bull elk in the Ely area by a man other than the person named on the tag. The father-son pair will face formal charges in upcoming months in White Pine County. 3 more people were sentenced in April and May for their roles in an Elko County elk poaching dating back to 2015. This was a lengthy and complicated series of cases that involved assistance from several agencies, especially Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Amy Jo Summers, 42, of Tremonton, Utah, was sentenced for gross misdemeanor possession of unlawfully killed big game. Penalties included over $2,600 in fines, plus forfeiture of a .243 rifle used in the crime and a 6x6 bull elk rack. She also faces a 5-year revocation of privileges. Stephen Frank Bennett, 69, of West Valley, Utah, pled no contest to a misdemeanor charge of unlawful possession of wildlife out of season and was assessed $355 in fines. Bennett also pled no contest in Box Elder County, Utah on March 6th for wanton destruction of protected wildlife and the killing of 2 more bull elk outside his hunting area. For these separate counts, he received a 365-day suspended jail sentence per charge, fines of nearly $900, restitution of $16,000 to be paid to the Help Stop Poaching Fund, 18 months of probation, and 40 hours of community service. In addition, a large 6x6 bull elk rack was seized from Bennett's residence. Administrative procedures will likely carry a 20-year revocation of privileges. Suzanne Arkush Bedke, 42, of Oakley, Idaho, pled no contest in Box Elder County on May 3rd to interfering with an officer for her role in the obstruction and holding of a game warden behind closed gates during the initial investigation. She received penalties that included 180-day suspended jail sentence and $680 in fines. Also, 2 different master guides are facing charges in unrelated cases for guiding on U.S. Forest Service lands without Forest Service special use permits. Mike Sonderman of Black Mountain Outfitters and Rob Wallen of Nevada Outfitters are both facing these charges. While a federal permit violation, we are generally expected to prosecute these cases in state courts since there are few, if any, federal officers in Nevada, and federal prosecutors seem to have no room in their caseload for these types of cases. 2 California residents were convicted in January for residency fraud charges. David Johnson of Paradise was convicted of a gross misdemeanor for providing false information to obtain a big game tag and paid over $2,000 in fines. And Geneva Williams of Magalia was convicted of a misdemeanor for providing false information to obtain a license and paid over $1,000 in fines. Our 2017 boating season has started with several tragic drowning deaths at Lake Mead and a fatal jet ski accident on the Colorado River at Laughlin. None of the drowning victims were wearing flotation devices of any kind. With such a wet winter following 5 years of drought, we have water in lakes and reservoirs that we haven't had in many years. It's reactivated a lot of boaters and led to much more boating activity over the Memorial Day weekend. We have so many more boaters this year that our licensing office nearly ran out of registration decals and recently ordered an additional 10,000. Also, in the name of staying vigilant for boaters operating under the influence, we're again conducting several OUI checkpoints at Lake Mead and Mojave this summer. From the Diversity Division, statewide nightjar surveys were conducted in both May and June. Breeding bird surveys are also being conducted around the state, and many routes are producing large numbers of species this year. These annual surveys should be completed within the next several weeks. In the Lake Tahoe Basin, biologists are monitoring the success of several raptor species nesting attempts. The peregrine falcon nest near Castle Rock seems to have failed, although the cause of the failure is unclear. The nest was being monitored to assess effects of climbing activity, rock climbing activity on nest success. However, there's been relatively few climbers on this route this year. Elsewhere in the basin, there were 2 other peregrine falcon nests. Both are active and have young on the nest. 4 osprey nests are being monitored along the shoreline of Lake Tahoe, in addition to 8 upland nests. Southern Nevada, southwestern willow flycatcher nesting season has begun. Diversity biologists have begun territory and nest searching surveys at 6 study areas, including assisting the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service survey at Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. Breeding activity and territory defense has been documented at 5 of the 6 areas, with nesting just getting initiated. Nests will continue to be monitored throughout the season for success and productivity. These surveys come on the heels of secretive marsh bird surveys that were recently completed at Key Pittman and Overton Wildlife Management areas. Ridgway's rails were documented at Key Pittman for the first time this year and is the northernmost record for the species in the state. 5 days were spent surveying for reptiles in the White Mountains. General goal of the survey was to find as many different kinds of reptiles within the range, with targeted concentration on detecting Panamint alligator lizards. This species is thought to occur in the area but has not been documented. Unfortunately, they were not detected this year either, so their occurrence in the state remains uncertain. Panamint alligator lizards are a species under status review by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And lastly, from the Conservation Education Division, Conservation Education staff attended and participated in the Outdoor Education Academy in Southern Nevada, which had over 100 instructors learning the newest techniques in teaching hunters. They also attended the International Hunter Education Association's annual conference in Glenenden Beach, Oregon. The Nevada Big Game Hunting Guide was completed and sent to the printer. It will ship today. Work continues on the all-new Nevada Small Game Hunting Guide, which will replace the annual brochures for upland game, migratory bird, fur bearer, and turkey. Staff met with representatives of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to plan a waterfowl hunting workshop for September. The purpose of the introductory workshop is to provide basic information that will help those who are new to waterfowl hunting or new to hunting in Nevada, and to minimize legal issues during the season. Staff hosted a wildlife cooking class at the Springs Preserve in Las Vegas. The class was sold out, and one participant is a freelance writer and expressed an interest in writing about that aspect of our educational efforts. Free Fishing Day statewide saw a record number of participants with over 3,200 attendees. There were 2,730 rods given away, and a number of activities were added for fun. Despite weather concerns, everyone said they had a great time and always looked forward to that particular event. 10 fishing clinics are planned for the summer months, spread across the state. And lastly, Hedwig the Owl has visited several schools over the past month, giving presentations on raptors and the predator-prey relationship. Approximately 130 students plus teachers have been contacted. That's all I have. Mr. Chairman, thank you for accommodating that detailed update.
Thank you, Director Wosley. Commissioner Young.
Tony, back to Lake Mead. Is there any good news about the water issue for special species? Specifically, the depth of the straw, lowering the temperature to where the hatchery, there's any closer chance of getting the hatchery going, or, you know, with the loss of all these fisheries in southern Utah this week, you know, I saw today that Panguitch Lake is lost. You know, I think the pressure is going to be pretty intense from southern Nevada for some fishing spots.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner Young, and I guess I would ask Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg to provide maybe a more detailed answer, but it doesn't look good. We're not going to be back in the trout rearing business at the Lake Mead hatchery anytime soon.
Thank you, and Commissioner Young, and for the record, John Schoberg, Fisheries Division Administrator. We were actually a little bit hopeful because originally as early as, or as recently as February and March, the projections were putting Lake Mead over 1,100 feet. The June projection scaled that back down. We're now looking at maybe 1180 if we're lucky, or 1080 if we're lucky, which means we're probably still not going to get out of that temperature range under existing conditions. I guess as Director Wasley mentioned, the good news is that at least that fluctuation range seems to be pretty stable, which will help in terms of boater access and angler shore access. But in terms of the hatchery intake, we're still continuing to explore options because we don't know what the long-term projection is, but those are going to be a longer-term solution that's going to require a considerable investment for infrastructure. But right now, we're looking at around 1080 as the maximum elevation through 2019, so that probably will not be enough to really help.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thank you again, Director Wasley, for a very detailed, keeps some of us that don't hear all the ins and outs in the loop. Further questions or comments for Director Wasley? Seeing none, we'll close agenda item 12C. Move to agenda item 12D, Wildlife Trust Fund Semi-Annual Report, Deputy Director Liz O'Brien. A report will be provided on the investment and expenditure of the money in the Wildlife Trust Fund for the period of July 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2016 pursuant to NRS 501.3585. Ms. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace and members of the Commission. I believe you have the report on the status of the Wildlife Trust Fund in your packets. This report is for the period July 1, 2016 through December 31, 2016, and the department received $35,335.50 in donations and expended $233,589. Attached to the report is a detail of every gift that we have received during that time period. Donations are received from a variety of conservation organizations, industry, private citizens in support of the department. These donations save state funds, mostly sportsman revenue, and in many instances can be used as match for federal dollars. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Any questions? Thank you. Close agenda item 12D, move to agenda item 12E, litigation report, Deputy Attorney General Wayne Howell. Mr. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Wayne Howell, Chief Deputy AG, and I'm filling in for Brian Stockton. And I know he's supplied a memorandum to you of news on several litigations. I'll just mention a couple that I think are the most significant, and one is the Walker River litigation, which has been going on for decades, and I believe it was last year the federal court ruled, issued a decision that was multifaceted and didn't please anybody, so there are appeals from all the parties to the Ninth Circuit. And Brian indicates that it hasn't been set yet for argument, but it has been briefed. So that'll be coming up soon. And then the other significant case, I think, is the Moldy litigation, which is pertaining to trapping. And Brian didn't mention it, but I had on my calendar that it is set for trial in October. So I will try to confirm that with him, make sure that's still true. And with that, I'd answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Close agenda item number 12E. Move to agenda item number 13, public comment period. Persons wishing to speak are requested to complete a speaker's card and present it to the recording secretary. No action can be taken by the commission at this time. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Public comment. Okay. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission and close agenda item number 13. And that will be it for today, and we will reconvene tomorrow, Saturday, June 24th at 8:30 a.m. Thank you.